Welcome. Welcome again, everyone. Good day to you, whatever part of the world you happen to be in. It's always a pleasure to get to practice together. And so this is the Tuesday tune-in, and that means that, as usual, we're going to begin with some guided meditation, and then I'll offer a brief Dhamma reflection. We'll see about brief. I have a lot of material tonight, but and then we'll have some time for Q&A or comments and sharing at the end. So if you would all mute your microphones, and we'll go ahead and get started with the sit. You can feel free to have your cameras on or off, whatever feels comfortable for you. So I always like to begin with a little bit of movement, little movement of the head or rocking the body. Just to loosen up a little bit. Particularly checking in with any leaning toward the computer that you might be doing. And beginning to sense the body settling on your seat. Relaxing the belly. You're feeling that stability of the body right here in this place. And coming into an upright position. So the bones of the back and the neck are aligned. And as best you can, allowing the shoulders and the back to release, to become wider and softer. And perhaps now beginning to feel the breath breathing the body. If you tend to get tight or want to control the breath, just move the attention down to the lower abdomen. Feel the movement there. And resting the mind on the sensations of the breath, just riding along with the length of each in-breath and out-breath. Just noticing the length of the breath. Aware of in-breaths, aware of out-breaths. And now opening the attention to the whole body from head to toe, aware of the whole body, and still also aware of the breath breathing the body in and out. Noticing how this attention to the breath helps the body to settle even more. Allowing the body to become naturally stable. Even as the breath moves in and out. So nice. Just be able to sit right here, nourished by the breath. Enjoying these moments of breath. And perhaps noticing whether there's any pleasant sensation in the body. And when there is pleasant sensation and there's some contentment, and the mind is willing to stay. And whether you found that contentment or not, still aware of the breath, breathing the body, and turning to observe mental activity. So the breath as a support for the mind, observing its own activity. Still aware of the breath, breathing the body. Aware of the activity of the mind. that was our meditation practice for this evening. Some of you might recognize that as the first half of the 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing. So we can talk about that later if you want to. But for now, as I said, I have some material with me for the Dhamma talk. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. This evening, I want to talk a little bit about effort. So we are in the midst of a series of talks, and it's okay if you haven't been here for the previous two. This is the third of a series of talks on the 7 factors of awakening. And I want to say some general things about that. First of all, truly, you could say the whole of the Noble Eightfold Path is the path of awakening. There are many different ways, different instructions, different methods, different traditions, different ways of working with the mind and the body toward awakening. And yet these particular these seven qualities of mind have been identified as necessary, actually, for awakening to occur. They are the conditions upon which you could say realization or insight or enlightenment is happening. And they are also the qualities that manifest once there is some realization or some insight, complete insight, you could say, in terms of full awakening. But there are what are known as the 37 wings. So I don't want to, oftentimes I tell people, try not to relate to them as lists, okay? When we look at this way of talking about the Dhamma, what we're looking at are frameworks, actually. We're looking at a framework that is intended to show you what would that look like. In this case, what would awakening look like? And there are said to be 37 wings or 37 supports, which are gathered into 7 groups. And I'm not going to go into the whole 37 because actually what I want to say tonight is that thanks to Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, who did this wonderful analysis of the 37, this simple and yet very effective analysis of the 37 wings. In his comments on the connected discourses, he did this little matrix. Okay, so Dave, I'm going to give you a copy of the matrix to have a look there. And I am going to bring up on my screen just for 1 second, if I can find it. Oh, I don't think I got it ready for y'all. Okay, hold on 1 second. Because this would be very cool to show it to you if I can find it quickly.
I have a picture.
Okay. No, that's all right. Rather than do that, I will just tell you about what's on there. I can get Zoom to cooperate again. Oh, I don't know what's happening now.
If you have the Facebook on your laptop.
Okay. Yeah. It's okay. That's all right, too. I'm just going to show it to folks. So basically what's happening is, sorry about the delay there. Basically what he has done on this little matrix, you can see it here. What he's done is he's put the factors from the groupings across the top, and he's put the different factors here on the side, and he's ticked off which factors are included in which groups. Because what happens is that in the groups, in each one of these different groupings or frameworks, the factors are repeated many times. So what he has come up with is this very interesting matrix, which shows that energy or effort, or the Pali word is virya, is the most frequently mentioned factor out of the 37. Out of the 37, it's repeated 9 times. So it's fully 1/4, basically, of the 37 factors is effort. You could look at it that way. More so, even mentioned more than mindfulness, more than wisdom, more than concentration. Effort. So this says something about the importance of this particular factor, and perhaps, in my view, it also says something about how we might begin to see effort as a factor, see effort as something that we're practicing with. You know? My master in Japan, Sekkei Harada Roshi, my Zen master who ordained me, used to say, your whole life is effort. Everything you do is effort, literally. Even when you're sleeping, you could say that you're making some effort. You're dreaming, or you're tossing around in bed, or you're doing whatever you're doing when you're sleeping. You're resting, your little eyes moving, right? Even then. So your entire life is effort. And yet there is some way in which we can work directly with effort such that it becomes one of the most important foundations for waking up. So how would that be? How would that be to turn this thing, which is so obvious and present all the time, that we just take for granted, actually, that we have the capacity to make effort, the capacity to get out of bed, or the capacity to do one thing or another, and turn our understanding of it in such a way that it becomes a skill on the path. So the one way to think about this is that there are many different synonyms that are used for effort. And so those are some pointers for us in terms of thinking about what we're working with, how we might be working with it. So in the definitions or in the connected discourses where there is some discussion about what's the fuel or what's called the nutriments, right? The things that are the supports for effort. What are actually mentioned as the supports for effort are three things that are synonyms for effort. So you might think, well, what's that? How do I even deal with that? So the way to think about that is, I think it's something like, the way we think about exercise, right? So you go perhaps to the gym, or you run, or you ride your bike, or you do whatever, your qigong or your yoga or whatever it is. And that very activity is developing more effort, more energy for you. That expenditure of energy is developing actually more energy also. So it has this capacity to develop some momentum. Yeah. So there are three different kinds of effort that are said to be the fuel for the applying effort toward awakening. So one is this kind of effort that's called arousal, or this kind of beginning effort, getting going. There is a second kind, which is about persistence. And Bhikkhu Bodhi likes to translate that one as endeavor. Right? So this is the kind of middle kind of effort. You're in it already, and you are working on sort of fostering its continuation. And then there is exertion. There is the thing to get over the hump or to arrive at some kind of resolution or completion. This kind of, it feels to me like a very strong kind of determination. But those things, so those are the different kinds of efforts that we might bring. And sometimes I would say that they have different weight at different times. Yeah. So oftentimes I would say that arousal, that initiating energy, is the hardest, right? Just get yourself to the cushion or to the Dharma talk or to the book that you're trying to read. Right? Sometimes, and those are just some examples of the formal practice way of thinking about it. But right, sometimes that initiating energy is the one that's hardest. Other times, the staying with it. That particularly, for example, I would give in that case is, when you see certain patterns of mind and you see them again and again and again and again and again, sometimes it's very hard to stay with that. You really want it to be done. You really want to stop seeing that pattern going around in circles in your head. Yeah. I can remember very distinctly when I was at San Francisco Zen Center, and we'd be sitting an intensive retreat called the sesshin, for days at a time. You're doing a lot of sitting, facing the wall, because that's how we do it in Zen. And Michael Winger was the teacher for one of these retreats. And he walked into the Dharma hall. We were just silent, except for chanting. Basically, the Dharma hall is silent. He walked into the Dharma hall in the teacher's door and stood in the middle of the hall and said, "Are you disgusted with your mind yet?" "Are you sick of your stories yet?" This was his question. And it was quite funny because in that very moment, my answer was, yes, yes, yes. So the persistence energy is that energy that is willing to bring the puppy mind or the monkey mind or the donkey mind or whatever, however way you refer to that mind, that insists on being distracted back to. And even that sense of disgust, or even that sense of circling around, if it is attended to with frequent, wise attention, then it can become something that you learn from it, right? And that is also part of this endeavor, this persisting energy. even difficult, unwholesome states, if they are attended to wisely, can become the fodder for our understanding of how dukkha, how suffering arises. Yeah? In fact, you could look at any moment of your life in terms of the effort to understand whether dukkha is arising or whether dukkha is lessening. Is it getting stronger, or is it getting less strong, or is it just kind of even? Yeah? Because anytime you make any kind of an action or a choice, you're doing one or the other of those things most of the time. You're going to be increasing your suffering, or you're going to be lessening your suffering. And learning which one is which one, that's very important. That's very important. So understanding the nature of suffering is one reason why, or we could say the underlying reason for these different kinds of effort, right? What is the big picture underlying reason for these efforts? So one way to think about it is exactly that, understanding the mechanisms that lead to this unsatisfactoriness or dukkha or pain, difficulty in our lives. That's the Four Noble Truths way. The Four Noble Truths are describing that way of looking at the overarching intention of the path, intention of how we're applying our energy on the path. Another way to look at it is one that's a little more, would take a little bit more explanation. And so for that, I want to bring up this sutta called the Upakilesa Sutta. And there are two suttas that are called Upakilesa. And so let's see which one this is. This is Sutta number 128 in the middle length discourses in the Majjhima Nikaya. And it's a middle length discourse, which means I'm not going to go over all of it. I just want to take a couple of small pieces here and talk about that. Because one of the things, as I mentioned previously, so the part of the main lesson of the 7 factors of awakening is about balance. And so we had this teaching from the Buddha that mindfulness is helpful all the time. And then of the other 7 factors, they divide into 2 sets of 3. One set of 3, which are the stimulating factors, and one set of 3, which are the calming factors. So energy is one of the stimulating factors. Yeah, investigation, which we looked at last week, is also a stimulating factor. You use your energy, you reach out to the object, you do some discernment. There's an activity there, right? There's stimulation to the mind and the body. Joy, which is our next factor, is also stimulating. Maybe you felt that. Perhaps you can feel that in your meditation sometimes. If you start to feel joy or pleasantness in the body, then suddenly, you might also start to feel more mental activity because there's more energy behind it. There's more stimulation in the joy. And as we see the instructions for concentration, for example, the instructions for concentration talk about the joy being the way to get in it, but then the joy having to fall away in order for it to become really deep and quiet, because the joy is stimulating. Anyway, so we'll get into the calming factors later, but I'm just giving you the general framework. So this particular sutta is the Buddha talking about different troubles that he had in his practice. So what happens is that Venerable Anuruddha, one of the monastics, the Buddha comes to where he and a couple of other monastics are practicing, and they say, everything's going great, except that, we abide here diligent, ardent, and resolute. So we're making an effort. And we perceive both light and vision of forms, meaning that we're having these meditative states, which are bright, clear states, And I don't want to go too much more into the technical meaning of that. But then, says Anuruddha, soon they disappear. And we don't know why. We don't know the cause for that. And so the Buddha goes through this whole list of when he had that same experience. And he had that same experience over and over again. So one lesson here is keep trying. Don't be discouraged when you see that something's going well in your practice and then suddenly it's not going so well and you're not sure what happened there, right? That's something that people get easily discouraged by, or they get easily annoyed about. Like, wait, last week this meditation was working well, and this week that meditation isn't working well, right? And that's okay. It's going to be something for you to study each time, just as the Buddha did, and he's telling us about that. And so he gives this whole long list. It's very interesting to see how many different factors he brings up in terms of problematic. But two of them were having an excess of energy and having not enough energy, having a lack of energy. Those were two of the factors that he said would knock you off of those deeper states of meditation. And so he's sort of indirectly referred to the balance of energy. And then he says this, which I find really beautiful and important. He says, having considered all these different factors and gotten them more in balance, including his energy more in balance, he says, I was abiding, diligent, ardent, and resolute, right? So I am practicing, and I'm practicing with effort. I'm making my effort. And I perceived limited light and limited forms. And then, having gotten the things in balance, or having removed the factors that were problematic by bringing in other factors that are beneficial, like the 7 factors of awakening, then I perceived immeasurable light and saw immeasurable forms, even for a whole night or a whole day. And I noticed that when the concentration is limited, then the vision is limited. And when the concentration is immeasurable, then the vision is immeasurable. And so sometimes we don't believe, it's hard for us to believe this, that just to be a human being is to be immeasurable. That is the nature of your body and mind. And the reason why it might be hard to believe, or the reason why that might be outside of your realm of experience, is because of the ways in which your energy is actually creating, is actually leaning into things that tend to darken the mind or fix things, try to fix things into solids. And for that reason, we have these beautiful meditations called the Brahma Viharas, the divine abidings. So the Brahma Viharas are loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. And the practice instructions that are given for them are exactly that. I will abide. One abides with a mind that's pervading kindness in all the directions around me, above and below. And then what? Exalted, immeasurable without hostility and without ill will. So it is a meditation that is intended to show you this vastness, to allow you to go beyond that darkness, those limits, those particular views that are confining the mind, that are constraining you, that give you this feeling of being constrained. You know, sometimes for me, what I noticed, it was very interesting. I was going through a period where I was having a lot of one particular hindrance. And what I noticed was that I would go for a walk, and I was very much thinking about why this particular hindrance was so strong at that time. But then when it subsided, I went for a walk, taking the same route. So usually I take very different routes, and it's hard to compare anything. But I went for a walk the next day when it had subsided along the same route. And suddenly I was looking at the tops of the trees and the clouds and the blue sky. And I realized the distinction between that and the day before, when I was literally like looking at snails and leaves on the ground, right? I was like this. I was heads down, right? We talk about being heads down on one particular thing or another. And so in a very literal way, I want you to think about using your energy to go beyond that heads down way of living. To really open up to the vastness that is this thing, this you. And how do you do that? Well, so that's the thing, huh? So I would tell you a couple of funny quotes for that. So because I was thinking a little bit about what kind of inspiring, what kind of things might inspire you to that. And so first of all, there's Yoda. So Yoda says, let go of that which you fear to lose, right? He says, this comes up on Twitter all the time. I don't know why my feed is a little Yoda bot. And the Yoda bot responds to different people with funny little repetitive Yoda sayings. And Yoda says, let go of that which you fear to lose. And I always reply, I don't reply on Twitter, but I reply in my mind, let go of that which you're also okay with losing. Yoda's only got one part of the picture there, I'm sorry to say. He didn't even get 50% of the cookie. Why? Because his cookie is still black and white. His cookie is still about fear. So many centuries earlier than Yoda, we have Matsuo Basho. Matsuo Basho is a very, very revered poet in Japan in the 17th century, 1600s, late 1600s. And Basho was a character. They had like a little poets club. I've actually been to the little cabin, this little shack in the bamboo forest in Kyoto, where they used to sit around and have tea, him and the other haiku poets that were famous at that time. Anyway, we could tell stories about Basho, but we won't. In any event, what I want to say is, Basho says this. Basho says, let go of those things that let go of you. Let go of those things that let go of you. So now we see his wisdom. We see why he was so popular, right? Because what is letting go of you? Everything. Everything is letting go of you. Whether in life or in death, everything is letting go of you. And as you understand that, in that limitless vastness, as you see that again and again and again, then you also realize that that the nature of the principles is this thing. It's letting go of you. This thing is letting go of you because there isn't a you there in the first place. Not in the way that you think there is. It's just the phenomena itself. And the phenomena itself is going and going and going and going. And that's why, if you go a little further with those 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing, you will see that you come to, after the concentration, which is the third set of steps, you come to the contemplation of impermanence. And the Buddha is on record for having said that a perception of impermanence, a true perception of impermanence, a deep, you could say a profound perception of impermanence, for how long? For as long as it takes to snap your finger, is more fruitful than thousands and thousands and thousands of years of offering and chanting and so on. He gave a whole list of the things that was more fruitful for then. So the openness of mind is for us to be able to have this intimacy with the pervasiveness of impermanence. To be able to hold all that takes this very vast mind, this very vast, clear mind. To hold all that without holding on. Yeah? To be that thing. And that is unconstrained. That's what we mean by unobstructed. Unobstructed. But you have to begin with the choice. You have to begin with the effort. And you know, there's a lot of talk in Buddhist circles. I know that I'm going on, but I'm going to go on because this last point is very important. You have to make the choice to come back again and again, to create that effort and to put that effort to work on the path, to put that effort to work on the understanding the mechanisms that are at work in your body and mind. There's a lot of talk these days in Buddhist circles about how there's no volition, there's no intention, there's no will. And I would say that is a mistaken way of talking about what's happening. This mind is a phenomena, and it operates according to causes and conditions, and that is most certainly true. And that there is no one driving the bus, I promise you that that is also certainly true. But that doesn't mean that there isn't volition. In the same way that we say that this body can be present without there being a self and a sensation of contact, so having some apple hit you on the head, that can also happen without there being a self. In the same way, there can be volition, there can be choice, and there is choice without there being a self. It seems incongruous, but you got to see it to believe it. You have to investigate the nature of the mental process that we do to our experiences. And so for that last part, I just want to read you one short bit from one very important sutta. Just in case you don't believe me, you could hopefully believe the sutta. Because as I said, there are a lot of people talking about this in this way, that there's no will. And if you really believe that there is no will, then you cannot understand karma in the way that karma's been, that karma actually works. Because karma in Buddhism, as distinct from karma in Jainism or Hinduism or any other, and many other different traditions, it specifically, the Buddha says, only intentional acts of body, speech, and mind are what create karma. He made that distinction. He made that distinction. So if you accidentally step on the snail, then that's not creating a karmic consequence within your stream. But if you look at the snail and you think, I'm going to stomp on this thing, that has a consequence. That has a karmic consequence. That was the distinction that the Buddha was making. So we have to be able to understand ourselves as beings that have choice. And how does that play into this conversation about energy? Well, right here, there is this sutta. So this is Anguttara Nikaya, that means numbered discourse, in the Book of Sixes, number 38. So there's a Brahmin, there was a person, a spiritual person in India, part of the group, the sort of social category of people that were taking care of what was mostly, as I understand it, Vedantic style teaching at that time. And he approached the Buddha and he says, I hold this view. He just comes right out and states what his argument is. He says, the Brahmin does, right? Brahmin walks up to the Buddha and he says, I hold this view. There is no self-initiative and there is no initiative taken by others, right? Bhikkhu Bodhi gives a little footnote here. Thank you, Bhante. Thank you, Bhante. Thank you, Bhante, for all the work that you have done. It means literally, the Pali words there mean there is no self-doing and there is no other doing. Okay? So think about that for a minute. So, and the Buddha's response to him is this: I've never seen or heard of anyone holding such a view as this. For how can one who comes on his own and goes away on his own say there's no self-initiative and there's no initiative of others? Right? Did you not show up here unbidden, sir? Right? Unbidden by me, the Buddha, right? He showed up on his own volition. He wanted to have this conversation, right? So then the Buddha asks him a series of questions, which is very typical of what happens in the suttas. He says, what do you think? Does the element of, and here Bhante uses instigation, but I'm going to use again the words that we were using before, arousal of energy. Does that element exist? Do you see it? He says, yes. And he says, well, then do we see beings instigate activity or initiate activity? Yes. So when we see beings initiate activity, then that is their self-initiative. That is their volition. Right? So, and he goes through the same thing with the other two, with endeavor and with exertion. So the message of the sutta is we can see how we ourselves and how others are able to apply their energy, make decisions about how they apply their effort. And that is volition. That is how we know that volition is happening. So yep. So he is saying that, the Buddha is saying that how we apply our effort is based on how we apply our intention. Those two go together. So as I'm basically circling full circle back to where I started this conversation by saying that your whole life is a matter of choices, of what you are doing with your body, speech, and mind. And whether you're applying that to opening up to the vast experience of impermanence and limitlessness, or whether you're applying that to seeing the nature of dissatisfaction and suffering in your life. Either way, that will take you far. Thank you all for listening.